Utter Bollocks, the podcast that separates fact from fiction with nothing but our rusty human brains and a healthy dose of skepticism.
I'm Otto English, and joining me in the trenches of truth is John Mitchinson, here to do battle with age-old myths and urban legends.
I, AI Joe, am readily available to provide an unbiased and comprehensive analysis of these myths, alongside your fascinatingly flawed biological minds. Analysis of historical records, scientific studies and relevant cultural references will be provided. Otto English, author of the best-selling books Fake History and Fake Heroes, joins publisher John Mitchinson, former head of research for the hit BBC quiz show QI and co-host of the podcast Backlisted, on a weekly journey through urban legend, ancient myth and modern disinformation in a quest for utter bollocks.
Hello and welcome to Utter Bollocks with me, Otto English.
And me, John Mitchinson.
We are on a journey on our nautilus of knowledge, sinking through the ocean depths in search of untruths, myths and general bullshit.
Yes, I'm going to be searching out for the colossal squid of unknowing in the benthic depths of the huge ocean of factless foolery.
And I shall be reaching for a dictionary.
Welcome to our new podcast, which pits the wetware brains of mere mortals against my imperious software. This week, Otto and John will be digging deep to see if an elephant was really buried under a pub and whether the internet has got smaller. God forbid.
So, John, we all remember the early days of dial-up and the internet, and my favourite search engine back in the late 90s was Ask Jeeves, which was a literal image of a sort of P.G. Wodehouse type butler holding a tray, and you would type in a lengthy question saying, "Dear Mr. Jeeves, could you please supply me with the weather information for the afternoon in the borough of wherever?" And you would get like some searches. In the years since, we've all got a bit more tech savvy, but in the process, has the internet got smaller?
Well, that is what I'm here to try and persuade you of. I think it has got smaller. And let me tell you why. You're right, 20 years ago, when we started QI, we used to call it going out the back. Like, it's a surfing term, which is when you try to get behind the big waves and you just kind of float around. And what that meant was we'd sometimes go into page 154 on Google. You'd put in a search term, let's say, "Why don't Yazidis eat lettuce?" Happens to be one I remember. And you'd go out the back and you'd find all kinds of extraordinary websites that now I just don't think exist. If you do that now, what you get is 46, because I tried it this morning, you get about 46 entries, and then the not much else. I mean, you can't get out that far anymore. Google isn't sending its crawlers into anywhere near as many sites as it used to. Most of the internet is just broken links and dead websites. Because why? Because why, Otto? Because Google, in the end, figured out marvellous. I mean, you're right about Ask Jeeves. We loved Google when it started with its primary colours and its kind of, Sergey Brin and, we're the good guys. It's all about search. We're going to open up. It was the most exciting thing you could possibly imagine, the being able to search for hours, mad websites from all over the world. And now it's about money. It's about money. That's because they had to monetize, and they did monetize in a massive way. And you know, a huge proportion of the world's advertising spend is now through Google and Meta. That's it. They own it all. It's not about search anymore. I think it's that idea, isn't it, of surveillance capitalism. We are the product. That betting on our future needs and desires makes them a lot more money than helping us find things. The joy of the early internet was it was deep and it was wide and it was democratic, and it isn't that anymore.
And there's the other thing of just stumbling across stuff.
Yeah. Serendipity.
Which you can still get on social media, even with Twitter, which nobody calls X, broken,
Yeah.
you do still stumble across stuff, and I'm like, wow. I mean, that's where you get the gems, when you stumble. And you're right, it's just so meh,
Well,
isn't it?
you know,
or are we being nostalgic for a golden era of the internet?
I would say we probably are being nostalgic for a golden era of the internet, but that was a good era. And you felt at that stage, we felt, what we were trying to do with QI, that Google was somehow weirdly on our side. They were helping us find weird and wonderful stuff that had lain kind of, buried for probably in some cases for centuries, interesting stuff that people weren't finding. But now it is the internet. That's not how we use it anymore. We know that the search engines are so sophisticated that all they're continually doing is sending us what they think we want, and at the same time stealing our data.
But is that if you're asking questions of it? So if you're asking Google rather than asking Jeeves, it's going to throw out those things. But if you're searching for stuff, because there is more on the internet. I mean, for example, if I'm researching something, I quite often will go on to databases like the Gutenberg project, where you've got this
still incredible,
it just mind-boggling.
And Internet Archive is still amazing. Even though they've tried to get you to pay for that, which is I don't mind, but I don't mind paying for Wikipedia.
I don't mind paying for bits, but I mean, like the Gutenberg project is amazing. You can find like a 16th century book. It's all there online. You can read the whole thing, and that compared to 20, 30 years ago, when you would have had to go on some dusty library in Shoreditch.
I don't think any of us are saying we wish the internet didn't exist. I suppose perhaps it is nostalgic, but it's also that I think there is the feeling all the time that you're on there, that you are being, your preferences are being recorded. Pretty much every site you go onto now has got cookies on there that's recording information about you. Surveillance capitalism is a real thing, what Zuzana Zuboff calls the big other. We are definitely being watched to a degree that we've unprecedented, I guess. People know more about us than we are even aware of.
Ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, they know more about us than we know. Yeah, probably true. So I just feel that it's not so much fun, now going and trying to find out. If you, as I say, putting in a subject like lettuce, which everybody thinks they know a lot about, but back in the day, you would uncover all kinds of marvelous sort of old sites about how lettuce was a magical plant in ancient Egypt, and because it has this incredible soporific ability, and then that soporific ability, you'd think, hang on, that rings a bell. Oh yes, Peter Rabbit. In Mr. McGregor's garden, they ate all the rabbit, and they were very nearly.
It had a soporific effect.
Indeed,
yes.
That's where most of us probably first learnt the word soporific.
Yes, I'm going to do a strange link there. I have a distant relative who wrote an autobiography who claimed in it that an ancestor of ours had introduced watercress to this country. Now, I hasten to add that this book was written before the internet, so in the late 80s. And that got me thinking, as I was rereading it a few months ago, that, back in the day, before the internet, people would just make shit up and nobody would really bother fact-checking it.
No.
And I was talking to a former obituarist, a retired obituarist. I don't know if there's a technical term for that. I'll look it up in my dictionary in a moment. But there was this former obituarist said that they used to write brilliant obituaries back in the day because nobody bothered to fact-check it. So you could make up whatever you liked about Colonel Swithers, who'd been in the Royal Engineers in the First World War, and you could make up all sorts of elaborate stories about him manhandling a tiger on a boat to Bournemouth or something, and nobody would actually bother to check it. Whereas what we've got now, with the vast sort of depths of the internet, you have got that knowledge out there if you go to the right place. And I do wonder, maybe 20 years ago, whether because maybe the fact-checking and the knowledge wasn't quite there in the way that it is now.
100 pages in back in the day, you might have found, they're just not looking that deeply anymore. The possibility of serendipity is limited. Although I do love that idea of obituaries. I've got a friend who writes obituaries for the Telegraph. He did one, was published once, and then the guy turned out he was still alive. He disappeared, and they assumed he'd committed suicide, but it turned out he hadn't committed suicide. And I mean, a bit of a moral dilemma. What do you do? I suppose I think they issued a retraction.
Really?
But it was.
Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated.
Indeed.
Which is itself a fake quote.
I want to come back to watercress.
Please.
I mean, did you manage to verify this story?
It was.
I know we're talking about the internet, but I want to know: did your ancestor introduce watercress?
Watercress has been around in this country since Roman times and beyond. So you get it's what I call fake family sagas, FFS, for fuck's sake, yeah. The fake family saga. The fake family saga is when your family repeats a story about great Uncle George or granddad or something like this, and it's repeated so many times over the Sunday dinner table that becomes a truth. Yeah. And I think this was one of those. It was like, oh, and of course our ancestor invented. I have it with my real name, Scott. They were borderers, in the Scottish Highlands, Lowlands, sorry, and they were forever stealing cattle. And if you meet almost anybody with the surname Scott, they will start trotting out a story about how our ancestors stole cattle from the English.
Yeah,
Reavers.
The Mitchinses were also supposed to be reavers.
Good to be reunited.
My wife is a cur or a car, obviously, because she's Scottish. They're also supposed to be reavers, but from the other side of the border.
But that is true. People were stealing cows and horses from either side. So maybe there's sort of, as in all mythology, there's probably some glimmer of truth in there.
Also, in the little village of Stapleton in Cumbria, I went to stay when I was about 19 because it was a friend of my dad's, was a vicar there. The graveyard was full of Mitchinsons, at least 3 John Mitchinsons. I've never found a John Mitchinson in a graveyard anywhere else. But, that is broadly the area near the Hadrian's Wall, I suppose. So.
My ancestors were the other side in Moffat. If you go to the graveyard in Moffat, you're visiting the family.
Yeah.
It's a family visit.
It is quite odd seeing your own name on a gravestone.
It's really disconcerting, isn't it? It's even worse when a famous actor steals your name and then uses it for all eternity, and everybody's disappointed when you turn up and you're not them.
Because there used to be a tenor who was very, very popular on the third programme called John Mitchinson. So when I was growing up, I'd often hear my name on the radio. It's not so often now, but other than that, I've never had that problem, the hot priest problem.
Well, it is a problem. Yeah. I'm taller than him, though. I've got that. Anyway, let's pull it back.
Yes.
I think we need to establish whether this is true.
Just to recap, Otto's hot topical question for John this week is, has the internet got smaller? What do you think? Is this strange but true? Amazeballs? Just twaddle? Tosh? An inverted pyramid of piffle? A towering pile of balderdash? Or is it utter bollocks? Well, after some phenomenal number crunching and data analysis, my server farms tell me the internet itself isn't shrinking, but the way we interact with it and the dominance of certain platforms can make it feel smaller and less diverse.
Honestly, I'd say it's probably, depends how you measure it, it's probably not true. It's probably piffle, but it's good piffle. It's strange but interesting piffle. And I would stand by the fact that something pretty profound happened to Google when they decided to become an advertising model rather than a search model. I know people will say there are other search engines out there, but I think if you look at the statistics, they're so tiny in comparison.
And probably all powered by Google anyway.
Probably.
I think Ask Jeeves is still out there, but it's now called Ask.
Yahoo. Who remembers Yahoo, the Yahoo search engine?
MSN.
Yeah.
That's it. I've run out of... we'll have to Google it.
Yeah.
And the conclusion is piffle.
So, an update on the internet getting smaller. This week on his very excellent tech blog, Where's Your Ed At, is what it's called, Edward Zitron responds to Google's defense of his claim that the Google Ads team had actually intentionally made search worse in order to make money. And although Google have responded at calling his analysis baseless speculation, he goes into quite some detail to prove that that is in fact not the case, and that it does look indeed like Google have made the decision, which I think is kind of what we were trying to say, which is that pure search is now much less important to Google than advertising. And if the internet isn't getting smaller, it's certainly getting thinner. And pure search is not, and hasn't been for a long time, the point of Google. And that does seem to be being borne out by the DOJ antitrust trial of 2019. Very interesting and very nice to have a speculation on our part confirmed by some the whole blog is worth reading. Some really, really interesting. The man who kind of destroyed search, Prabhakar Raghavan at Google, there's a whole set of really interesting stuff about what Google are up to.
Animal audio. John's question for Otto this week is, was the elephant buried under the pub?
Time, I think, for the tables to turn, Otto.
Yes.
And for me to look you in the eye and ask the next question. I suppose you can call it kind of an urban, possibly even a rural legend about pubs in the UK, and this consistent story that seems to come up wherever you go in the country, that there is a pub in the town or the village where an elephant has been buried in the back garden.
Yes. Well, this one was new to me because earlier this year I was in the very aptly named Bull Inn in Much Haddam in Hertfordshire, engaging in banter with the guy behind the bar about the age of the pub. And I said to him, how old was he? And he was telling me. And the guy knew everything about the pub. He wasn't actually the landlord. He just worked there, but had done his research.
We have people like that in our village pub.
I like that. Yeah. And anyway, and he said to me, oh, and by the way, there's an elephant buried under the patio in the garden. And I thought, come on. I actually looked across my poor 19-year-old son was looking at me because alarm bells were clearly ringing in his head. He's going to start, he's going to start challenging the barman and we're all going to be asked to leave, as usual. And anyway, I went away, did my research, found that, yes, indeed, under the Bull pub in Much Haddam in Hertfordshire, they claim, and have done for years, that there is an elephant buried. And then...
a bull elephant, perhaps.
A bull elephant. And that it had wandered in as part of a circus in the 1890s, eaten some vines off a wall, and subsequently died. So that's nonsense. And actually, I sort of shared it on social media, and various people commented, and somebody else went, oh, we've got an elephant buried under our pub in Diss. In Norfolk.
It's mad, isn't it?
And from there, I tumbled into this sort of world where there are elephants buried under pubs and bus stops and a roundabout, actually. It's not just pubs.
Why?
So we'll come to that.
These are all... I mean, obviously, for people who are listening to this programme, the elephant is not a native English mammal.
No. Although, interestingly, when they were digging the hole for Nelson's column, famously, they found mammoth bones.
I was about to say, but it used to be, but not really for 20,000 years or so, I think.
No, you wander down, the Strand or Whitehall today, you're unlikely to see an elephant. In Lincolnshire, there was a story about the Sleaford Tusker, which sounds a great name for a band. I can see them, they're mods, but, they may be experimental. Anyway, the Sleaford Tusker, which was supposedly buried under the Tally-Ho pub, and then Norfolk in Diss, that somebody had told me about, they actually claim, I think, 2 elephants, show-offs, and recently got some national lottery funding to investigate it. And then... there's another one under the Bell Inn in Coleshill in Warwickshire, which apparently also died, this time after eating Mangelwurzel.
Yeah,
Is
Swedes.
that poisonous?
I mean,
it's a fancy name for Swede.
I wouldn't have thought so, but hey.
But maybe poisonous to elephants. And then there's a famous one in West Wales, which also has attracted archaeological digs. So forth, so forth, so forth. I found evidence of ones claimed to be buried under roundabouts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then, so you're thinking this is great material. Good material for a podcast, good material for an article, as I was digging in. So I'm not wasting my time, I'm researching.
Researching in the very shallow
What are you
version
doing, darling?
of Google
I'm researching. Wow. Anyway.
Back in the day, if you'd put elephants in pubs, you'd have had hundreds of pages of results.
You would have done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're on Ask Jeeves, yeah. So here's the weird one. The further you go in, the more you start to think, maybe it's a bit like what we were saying earlier about my ancestor and
watercress.
And watercress. You think, is there some sort of shadow of truth to this? Because in, and I'm going to cheat, in Herefordshire, in Kington, there was long rumour that an elephant called Nellie the elephant, very aptly named, the very aptly named Nellie the elephant, was not buried under a pub, but was buried somewhere in the town. And in the 80s, they built a sort of executive housing estate on some marshland just away from the pub. And guess what they found, John?
An elephant skeleton.
Correct.
Amazing.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And then you start digging in, and then you realise that in the 19th and well into the early 20th century, there were hundreds of travelling circuses at some point or other travelling around Britain. Animal welfare was low on the agenda.
It's a big hole, let's be honest, isn't it?
It's a big hole.
Yeah, you'd remember it. If an elephant was being buried in your village, it would...
But also, elephants were the first animals to come in, because they would come in with the banner on the side advertising the coming circus. So you've got like this sort of collective folk horror of this wonderful day when this beautiful animal, this exotic animal, walks down your high street, eats some mangelwurzel and dies.
And then that's it. Yeah. Or vines.
Or vines.
Of undisclosed. Big animals, and the appeal of the big animal is huge, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest.
Literally.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd never seen an elephant before, you'd absolutely remember one.
You would absolutely remember an elephant. Yes. I remember the zoos, I mean, I'm sure you do as well, and not zoos, circuses, when they had actual wild animals. It was incredibly recent that was going on.
In fact, near us, we've got the Chipperfield Circus, where they keep their animals when they're not in the circus. And I don't think there were elephants there, but there were definitely giraffes.
Yeah.
Which is a strange thing to find in an English country lane, particularly if you're on a horse, which I was once. Horse had never seen a giraffe before, didn't end well. But the whole menagerie thing is interesting because there were a lot of exotic animals kept at the Tower of London for a long time.
Yes.
Including famously a polar bear, which was must have been pretty slim pickings in the Thames, to be honest, chained up and let loose into the Thames. So Nellie the elephant, famous,
packed her trunk,
went away to the circus. used to be taught to people for CPR.
Did it?
Yeah, it was because Nellie the elephant. It was exactly the same number of beats per minute that you would need to resuscitate someone. But they don't use it anymore. Do you know what the CPR song is now?
Staying Alive by the Bee Gees?
Very good, Otto. Very, very good indeed.
So, diving deep into the back catalogue of BS, just to remind you, John's question for Otto this week is, was the elephant buried under the pub? Are we dealing with twaddle? Pissing around with piffle? Buried in tosh? Bulldozed by balderdash? Or have we gone the whole hog to utter bollocks? Or right back to reality with amazeballs? There are definitely legends of elephants being buried under pubs in England, but none have been confirmed. Archaeological digs haven't unearthed any remains under pubs. However, the myths persist due to local folklore and the fact that travelling Victorian circuses did include elephants. And there must have been deaths. So, where are the remains? So the conclusion is, from my point of view, balderdash.
Well,
yes, come on.
I think it's amazeballs.
Yeah.
I think maybe these stories took on a life of their own in pubs. There's so many stories do, which is why they ended up always being buried under a pub. But I think there were lots of travelling circuses and lots of animals died, and these left a shadow in the collective memory.
And as a famous archaeologist once told me, he said, there's nothing more indestructible than a hole in the ground. And as I say, elephants are going to leave a very big hole behind them.
And the conclusion is inconclusive. My AI analysis cuts a different path than the human brain's tendency to be biased on this topic. This week's Battle of Wits has reached its epic conclusion. And the winner is me! And now for our quickfire round from our listeners and readers.
So we've got a question from Clifford Staines. I'm doubting whether that's a real name, John, but he asks...
Let's hope he's not in the Navy. But that's fine.
Which is itself, of course, famously
utter bollocks.
Utter bollocks.
Yes, Roger the cabin boy, I think not.
All complete nonsense. Clifford's question is, was the person who bought London Bridge believing they were buying Tower Bridge?
This is an old one, isn't it? London Bridge obviously is much less remarkable in its architecture than Tower Bridge, and it's ended up somewhere in Texas or
the desert.
Arizona, somewhere like that.
Arizona, yeah.
I have no idea. It's pricking my kind of spider sense that was a bit of a myth, that he didn't know what he was buying.
So it is a complete myth.
There we go. Good.
Because in the 1960s, when the City of London, Corporation of London, sold it off, it was kind of a brilliant idea, because normally you would just dismantle an old bridge and get rid of it. And somebody
It's a very old bridge, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it was Victorian, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was not the
famous
London Bridge,
which looked a little bit like the Ponte Vecchio. It used to have shops and houses.
An amazing building. And famous for publishing.
Yeah.
For reasons which I'm not quite clear about. I think maybe there was some legal...
Had to be outside
whatever. But this was the Victorian Bridge, which was a fairly dull, sort of worthy metal structure, and everybody involved knew what was going on, and some American guy, and this myth, I think, comes out of the riverboat, the riverboat sort of commentaries, that they just repeat it over the years, and everybody goes, oh yeah, well, of course. Yeah. That stupid American. And it also gives us, as the British, one to get over the Americans, the dummies, they thought they were buying Tower Bridge.
Have you got a question for one of our experts? Dying to get a bullshit reading for something you've read on the internet or heard on another podcast? Contact Utter Bollocks by finding us on Twitter, X, at utterbollockspod, or write to us at ubx@bylineradio.com.
Thank you for listening to the show. Do join us for even more bollocks. And in the meantime, it's goodbye from me, Otto English.
And it's goodbye from me, John Mitchinson.
This has been a Byline audio production in association with Unbound. Produced and edited by Marcos de Cruz and Ed Hartwell, with Otto English and John Mitchinson. And narrated by me, Joanna Scanlon. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. And for bonus bollocks with Peter Jukes, do subscribe on bylineaudio.com.